My headset's making. Oh, what? Test. We are passing the test. Hmm. Test. Test. Hmm. All right. Welcome to the 72nd episode of the Henry George Daily Devotional. Are you devoted yet? We are in chapter 3 of book 7, Claim of Landowners to Compensation. Henry George writes in 1879, "The truth is, and from this truth there can be no escape, that there is and can be no just title to an exclusive possession of the soil, and that private property in land is a bold, bare, enormous wrong, like that of chattel slavery." I know I've said chattel. I've also pronounced it chattel. I'm going with chattel. I don't know. Not an expert in chattel. The majority of men in civilized communities do not recognize this simply because the majority of men do not think. With them, whatever is right, until its wrongfulness has been frequently pointed out, and in general they are ready to crucify whoever first attempts this. It's a little simplistic here. Like, I don't know. In terms of what's right and wrong in interpersonal relationships, I think everybody has pretty decent intuition. It is something subtle about why we fail to understand land. Like, honestly, that's one of the bigger uh, sometimes like questions I have about Georgism is like it's kind of weird to be like, "Oh, you're telling me humans have done this wrong ever since we started being civilized?" Um, and it's not, I mean, a lot of places haven't quite treated land like we currently treat land. And it does harken back to, I remember hearing a bunch of philosophy people say, the best form of governance is a benevolent dictator. You have one dude, he owns everything, he's the king, but he's just very kind and just, and he knows everybody, and he makes sure everybody gets what's fair. But anyway, George continues, "But it is impossible for anyone to study political economy even as at present taught, or to think at all upon the production and distribution of wealth, without seeing that property in land differs essentially from property in things of human production, and that it has no warrant in abstract justice. This is admitted either expressly or tacitly in every standard work on political economy. But in general, merely by vague admission or omission." Well, all right, George, if it's expressly or tacitly admitted, and sometimes by admission or sometimes omission, what what that's a pretty broad claim. Attention is yeah, if people if people don't espouse my view, it's yeah, it's admitted by omission. Um, doesn't count. Attention is in general called away from the truth, as a lecturer on moral philosophy in a slave-holding community might call away attention from too close a consideration of the natural rights of men, and private property in land is accepted without comment as an existing fact, or is assumed to be necessary to the proper use of land and the existence of the civilized state. I think there's this presumption that war somehow in olden times was more just, um, and so the winner somehow getting that land was just. I know that as a kid, or even getting older, I've almost like idealized, you know, some indistinct idea of being an early human warrior, or even more a medieval warrior, where you're fighting in like these correct wars, and then you've defended your people, and that's your land, and you've defended your country and your land. Um, Yet it's like very hard to point at any actual conflict and be like, oh yeah, the people who aggressed here um, deserve all this land, and the people who were just here before, you know, don't. And then it's like, how do you even get to the first situation where there was a people in one area who didn't take it from somebody else anyway? Um, I was reading a bunch about the War of the Roses the other day, uh, and that is sort of one of my idealized wars. But who's right, who's wrong, who should get to control England? And they ended up just marrying each other or whatever. I am not knowledgeable about English history, so leave me alone. The examination through which we have passed has proved conclusively that private property in land cannot be justified on the ground of utility. All right? Can't be justified on utility. We're going to make it through this one? I don't think so. That, on the contrary, it is the great cause to which are to be traced the poverty, misery, and degradation, the social disease, and the political weakness, which are showing themselves so menacingly amid advancing civilization. Expediency therefore joins justice in demanding that we abolish it. We haven't recognized this expediency, have we? Excuse me. When expediency thus joins justice in demanding that we abolish an institution that has no broader base or stronger ground than a mere municipal regulation, what reason can there be for hesitation? Ah, yes, here we get into the whole Georgist naysayers that surround me everywhere, all you people listening. It can't be done, it can't be done, it'll never happen. That's what you sound like. The consideration that seems to cause hesitation, even on the part of those who see clearly and read clearly, that land by right is common property, is the idea that having permitted land to be treated as private property for so long, we should, in abolishing it, be doing a wrong to those who have been suffered to base their calculations upon its permanence. Ah, yes. Look over in that neighborhood. There's a whole bunch of people who are poor and starving. Look over in that neighborhood. There's a bunch of people who own a bunch of houses, uh, and own all the houses over there and rent them out to all those poor and starving people. We better not implement Georgism too fast, because all of the people in the nice neighborhoods, uh, they might have to give up their rental properties. Oh no. Uh, there is sort of one way in which I'll concede to the landed class people. Of course, there's a spectrum of how egregiously they have exploited the land, and one person to another person. There's big differences. But they will be affected almost in proportion to how much they currently exploit land. The reason I would consider compromise is purely for pragmatic political reasons. Like, if you can get a tyrant to agree to stop their tyranny in 6 months, versus 6 years. I mean, why wouldn't you agree to that? If it's gonna take a bloody war and a bunch of people are gonna die, but the tyrant says, "All right, let's not have a war. I'll just acquiesce again in 6 months or something," then I would accept that too. Of course, who knows if they're gonna stick to their word. Whereas if the tyrant's like, "All right, I'll give up all of my tyranny right now if you give me, $100." It's like, well, the tyrant doesn't deserve that $100, but you know, it's better than they're continuing to be a tyrant. So if we need to pay off the landowners, I mean, but maybe if we're having to pay them off, we're already like the society doesn't truly all believe or understand. I don't know. I don't know how you actually affect political change anyway. Sortition. All right, we'll go back to George. That having permitted land to be held as rightful property, we should, by the resumption of common rights, be doing injustice to those who have purchased it with what was unquestionably their rightful property. Thus, it is held that if we abolish private property in land, justice requires that we should fully compensate those who now possess it. As the British government, in abolishing the purchase and sale of military commissions, felt itself bound to compensate those who held commissions, which they had purchased in the belief that they could sell them again, or as in abolishing slavery in the British West Indies, 100 million, the six is a dollar bill, was paid to slave owners. All right, yeah, this does remind me of like sort of the common law. Uh, what happened? I think I've mentioned this before, or maybe I blogged about it. What happens when you buy stolen goods and you yourself were not aware they were stolen? I forget how most law. I mean, how. What happens if you buy stolen goods and didn't realize it? It's not punishable by law. Okay, so if you own a bunch of land right now, you didn't realize that you were like a conqueror, we won't punish you by law. Um, but it sounds like in these cases, uh, you don't get to keep any of it. We don't pay you off for turning it in. However, of course, we do cut deals. So if you bought stuff and then you're like, "Hey, I'll tell you who sold it to me," maybe we get you a deal. So tell us who sold us your land and who they took it from all the way back. I don't know. Even Herbert Spencer, who in his Social Statics has so clearly demonstrated the invalidity of every title by which the exclusive possession of land is claimed. Yes, landed titles. Also, isn't it crazy to think about military commissions being similar to like taxi medallions? Like, it's not meritocratic who gets to be in charge of the military. It's just rich people buying position. I'm sure there was still meritocracy at some point because people want to win wars. Uh, anyway, Herbert Spencer's thing um, gives countenance to this idea, though it seems to me inconsistently by declaring that justly to estimate and liquidate the claims of the present landholders, who have either by their own acts or by the acts of their ancestors given for their estates equivalents of honestly earned wealth, to be one of the most intricate problems society will one day have to solve. Uh-huh. Too hard to solve. Like figuring out who should pay reparations to whom in America. Like, who cares? Just make society free now, and everyone who's born into it has a free and equal share of the land. It is this idea that, like, I would say, this is me going off on my own here, I would say a human is happier knowing that they can work hard and receive the compensation for their work than if they were not able to receive compensation for their work and just given, like, some flat amount. This is like the argument people make against sort of naive universal basic income. It's like, but but maybe I'm not even so sure about that because I often fight against the idea that people have to have work in their lives to feel meaningful and feel like they're contributing to society. Uh, I feel like I only feel the need to contribute to society if I feel like there's something wrong with society. If I'm in a group where everything seems really good and fair and happy, I don't know. I'm just talking about like a friend group or something, just like a hangout or a party where it's like nothing's wrong, everything's good here. We're all just hanging out, partying or happy. It's like I don't feel. Do you feel a need to contribute when you're at a good party, or but when you go camping and you have to set up camp, you feel a need to contribute. Anyway, I don't know what I'm talking about. It is this idea that suggests the proposition which finds advocates in Great Britain that the government shall purchase at its market price the individual proprietorship of the land of the country. And it was this idea which led John Stuart Mill, although clearly perceiving the essential injustice of private property in land, to advocate not a full resumption of the land, but only a resumption of accruing advantages in the future. His plan was that a fair and even liberal estimate should be made of the market value of all the land in the kingdom, and that future additions to that value, not due to the improvements of the proprietor, should be taken by the state. Yes, this is our land value tax. To say nothing of the practical difficulties which such cumbrous plans involve. Well, it's only for the future additions to that value. Not quite right. To say nothing of the practical difficulties which such cumbrous plans involve in the extension of the function of government which they would require and the corruption they would beget, their inherent and essential defect lies in the impossibility of bridging over, by any compromise, the radical difference between wrong and right. What if we stop there in the middle of a paragraph? Is that crazy? I guess it's been 17 minutes. How much farther? I'm doing it. I'm stopping in the middle of a sentence because I'm going to do two today because I didn't do any yesterday. I'm losing my streak, my touch. All right, like, subscribe, share, believe, comment, think about it. Welcome to the Henry George Daily Devotional, episode 73. We continue in chapter 3, claim of landowners to compensation. Do we pay off the landlords? We stopped in the middle of a paragraph, one sentence in really, so we'll continue. Just in proportion as the interests of the landowner holders are conserved, just in that proportion must general interests and general rights be disregarded. And if landholders are to lose nothing of their special privileges, the people at large can gain nothing. To buy up individual property rights would merely be to give the landholders in another form a claim of the same kind and amount that their possession of land now gives them. It would be to raise for them by taxation the same proportion of the earnings of labor and capital that they are now enabled to appropriate in rent. their unjust advantage would be preserved and the unjust disadvantage of the non-land holders would be continued. This can't be quite right, George, because like as much as land speculators price their land based on like its future returns, like that's usually priced out for like 20 years or so. Um, it would, right, like, I don't know, sort of a mathy argument. But suppose in the year 1900, right, you bought out all of the landhold lords. Um, after about 20 years, like, like, uh, you know, usually the rental price of a piece of land plus property is like 5% ish yearly um, of its like sale price. So like in 20 years, you sort of recover it. Um, and then it's just pure gravy after that. And that's like just established by convention or precedents, I guess. And maybe that's sort of based off of about how long it takes for the actual building structure to deteriorate. So it's sort of a depreciation over that asset. Um, but it's sort of weird to look at any piece of land on the earth, even without uh, even without any structure on it. And suppose we did have a system that we agreed to where you can just put a flag on the ground and claim a piece of land. And if you can do that and you can claim a piece of land um, forever, and then it'll be passed on to your kids or whom like forever, like you're basically gonna be willing to pay however much, like it's like almost an infinite like amount of money. Of course, not infinite because you're basing it off of that land being infinite. But uh, if you're purely selfish and don't care at all about your kids, you would price it based that piece of land on how long you're going to live. So you would be willing to only pay for that piece of land, how much rent you could extract for your own lifetime. But if you have a long-term view um, of your kids, you might be willing to pay even more. So that's what I'm saying. Even when we look, but people have this sort of middle bias of like they prioritize how much money they'll make in their life, then maybe a bit for their kids and grandkids, but they don't weight all of time equally. And so if you're to buy out, the way land is priced anywhere, it's not priced for all of the rest of humankind's existence. It's heavily biased towards how much benefit the current landholder can get. Because even though we don't like all these landlords, they're not trying super hard to be like, I want land to be the thing that continues forever and ever. They're really just out for themselves. They're not as so much out for the institution of land monopoly. Like that's not their passion. Their motivation is themselves, and so they'll only price land or be willing to pay for land, which then affects the price of land based on a timeline of their own life. So if we were to sacrifice, I mean, we're already sacrificing many generations to the landlords. If we were to just buy out one generation of landlords so that there would be no future generation of landlords, yes, those landlords would still get all of this produce from society, um, and those landlords would still get their tyranny, but it would sort of stop with them. So so anyway, this is why I'm much more sympathetic towards buying out landlords than George seems to be. Though I grant that there's no It's not, the justice does not demand that we compensate the landlords. Anyway, let's keep going. Um, To be sure, there would be a gain to the people at large when the advance of rents had made the amount which the landholders would take under the present system greater than the interest upon the purchase price of the land at present rates. But this would be only a future gain. Okay, he sums it up a lot quicker than I did. And in the meanwhile, you guys think Henry George is long-winded. Wait till you read Max Clark's book. And in the meanwhile, there would not only be no relief, but the burden imposed upon labor and capital for the benefit of the present landholders would be much increased. For one of the elements in the present market of land is the expectation of future increase of value, and thus to buy up the lands at market rates and pay interest upon the purchase money would be to saddle producers not only with the payment of actual rent, but with the payment in full of speculative rent. Or, to put it another way, the land would be purchased at prices calculated upon a lower than the ordinary rate of interest. For the prospective increase in land values always makes the market price of land much greater than would be the price of anything else yielding the same present return. And interest upon the purchase money would be paid at the ordinary rate. Thus, not only all that the land yields them now would have to be paid to the landowners, but a considerably larger amount. It would be virtually the state taking a perpetual lease from the present landholders at a considerable advance in rent over what they now receive. For the present state would merely become the agent of the landholders in the collection of their rents, and would have to pay over to them not only what they received, but considerably more. Yeah, I guess he's just presuming we couldn't do it in one lump sum, and so there would have to be payments made out over time. Or, I don't know, maybe like the idea is you do pay them, say they got all that money right now, well then they still would be able, I don't know exactly what he's saying, to be honest. Mr. Mill's plan for nationalizing the future unearned increase in the value of land by fixing the present market value of all lands and appropriating to the state future increase in value would not add to the injustice of the present distribution of wealth, but it would not remedy it. Further speculative advance of rent would cease, and in the future the people at large would gain the difference between the increase of rent and the amount at which that increase was estimated in fixing the present value of land, in which, of course, prospective as well as present value is an element, but it would leave for all the future one class in possession of the enormous advantage over others which they now have. All that can be said of this plan is that it might be better than nothing. Yep. Such inefficient and impracticable schemes may do to talk about, where any proposition more efficacious would not at present be entertained. And their discussion is a hopeful sign, as it shows that the entrance of the thin end of the wedge of truth. Oh, we got a wedge of truth now. Justice in men's mouths is cringingly humble when she first begins a protest against a time-honored wrong. And we of the English-speaking nations still wear the collar of the Saxon thrall, and have been educated to look upon the vested rights of landowners with all the superstitious reverence that ancient Egyptians looked upon the crocodile. But when the times are ripe for them, ideas grow, even though insignificant in their first appearance. One day the third estate covered their heads when the king put on his hat. A little while thereafter, and the head of a son of St. Louis rolled from the scaffold. Yeah, the third estate, that's the poor people? Yes. Peasant, farmers to the bourgeoisie. So the first estate, I guess, is the king. The second estate is like the nobility. Um, and I guess when they covered their heads, that was a break with tradition instead of taking off their heads and maybe bowing. I don't know. The anti-slavery movement in the United States commenced with talk of compensating owners, but when 4 million of slaves were emancipated, the owners got no compensation, nor did they clamor for any. And by the time the people of any such country as England or the United States are sufficiently aroused to the injustice and disadvantages of individual ownership of land to induce them to attempt its nationalization, they will be sufficiently aroused to nationalize it in a much more direct and easy way than by purchase. They will not trouble themselves about compensating the proprietors of land. I like this a lot. This is when I'm arguing with Georges and they want to talk about all these like methods of implementation. I'm always saying, whatever the people go for when we actually have momentum and are actually mainstream, that will be figured out easily, quickly. Figuring out exactly how to do, landlord reparations, uh, is sort of not exactly a waste of time, but kind of a waste of time. Nor is it right that there should be any concern about the proprietors of land, that such a man as John Stuart Mill should have attached so much importance to the compensation of landowners as to have urged the confiscation merely of the future increase in rent, is explainable only by his acquiescence to the current doctrines that wages are drawn from capital, and that population constantly tends to press upon subsistence. Malthusianism over populationism. These blinded him, John Stuart Mill, as to the full effects of the private appropriation of land. Thing is, maybe now, looking back, it's easy to see how everyone got actually stirred and aroused over chattel slavery, because it seems so egregiously wrong now. Like, how could you ever abide by human slavery? Um, it's hard to imagine people like connecting the dots to like poverty and starvation quite as emotionally to private property and land. But maybe in 1,000 years they or a few hundred years they will, and be like, all right, slavery was super bad, we got rid of that. And then private property land was also pretty bad, we got rid of that. Can't believe we ever let people just claim land. It's just hard to even like you see a poster of a poster child, you get emotional. But I mean, you look at images of all the homeless people, and that's pretty horrific. Is that and if we don't blame, like, you look at slavery, you see someone in chains, you're like, oh, you blame the slave master right there, boom, you hate him. You look at all the poor people in uh, Los Angeles, and I guess I'm as guilty as anyone else looking at them and sort of judging them in a Malthusian sense, where it's like, oh, they needed to be more temperate and harder working and not do drugs, go get a minimum wage job. And it's like hard to, they don't have, because there's no one master over them, one human dude running around stealing all their money, demanding all their money with the backing of government. It's this nebulous, oh, there's nowhere for them to have any land. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe we will all get roused. I'm roused. Are you roused? John Stuart Mill saw that the claim of the landholder is altogether subordinate to the general policy of the state, and that when private property in land is not expedient, it is unjust. Principles of Political Economy, Book 1, Chapter 2, Section 6. But entangled in the toils of the Malthusian doctrine, he attributed, as he expressly states in a paragraph I have previously quoted, the want and suffering that he saw around him to the niggardliness of nature, not to the injustice of man. Yeah. There's some like overt neo-Malthusian who joined some of the Georgist discords and was having some rousing arguments with some Georgists about Malthusian, neo-Malthusianism. And thus, to him, John Stuart Mill, the nationalization of land seemed comparatively a little thing that could accomplish nothing toward the eradication of pauperism and the abolition of want, ends that could be reached only as men learned to repress a natural instinct. Yeah. I do have I think a lot of people don't realize that they believe in Malthusian doctrine. Um, they often think of it as something like Darwinian, and they don't like to talk about it too much. But something like population is, you know, we're like pushing up against it a little bit here and there, and it's only going to get worse. Um, yeah. Great as he was and pure as he was, or they have this like historical view that Malthus was right up until something like the Industrial Revolution when we like invented all these things, and that prior to that, in a purely I don't know if you'd say fully primitive, but something like that in a primitive human existence that Malthus would be right. But the idea, excuse me, the idea that as humans congregated together closer in a just way, that they're able to figure out more and better uh, ways of laboring, cooperating efficiently through, division of labor, um, like that does sort of require some kind of a belief. And it's easy to look back on history and agree to it. But suppose you started playing a video game and you're on an island, um, and there's, a bunch of berries you can pick, and you have to eat berries to keep your character alive. And the berries replenish every night, every day there's a new batch of berries. But it's a very simple video game. So another player shows up, uh, there's not really a way to cooperate. Like, there's no way to make a berry basket or something, um, or there's no way to make. Uh, well, berry basket would just let you collect more. If we're running out of berries, that's a separate issue. But there's no way to plant berries and to create more berry bushes. Let's say that's not programmed into this video game. So you could imagine a video game version of Malthusian doctrine being true in a video game, where, sure, as more people showed up, each person could pick more berries, but each person could have 4 kids or something, and our ability to harvest more and more berries from the land just won't keep up. So suppose in this video game, well, you don't need to players. It's a multiplayer game, so people just join. So it would be true in that case, and you could think of like primitive man if they were somehow learned and read Henry George, be like, I don't know if I believe that more and more people will be able to produce more and more, even more than just staying at the same level of production per capita. Um, Looking back, we can kind of, I'm persuaded, looking back at the progression of mankind, that at no time did Malthus's doctrine hold. In other words, at all times when there were more people gathered together, they could have a higher production per capita. Per capita production went up as each person joined. On average, for society and anywhere on the earth. Of course, you can find little exceptions, little pockets, like what about, you know, the, if people were just on Antarctica? Okay, but the whole George's argument is, or not George's actual comment that he always makes is we're talking about general tendencies. We want general solutions. So in general, on the earth, at no time did Malthus's doctrine hold true, in my opinion, but it is a somewhat empirical claim. It's not like we can all point to a line in the Bible that we all agree is unquestionably true, and that line says, when men gather together, they will be more efficient, they will be greater than the sum of their parts at all times throughout history in all locations, something like that. All right, so that was my little diatribe. What does diatribe mean? Well, let's put our fingers in the right places. Forceful and bitter attack against something. It wasn't a diatribe against Malthusian doctrine, I guess. All right. Back to George for a little bit longer. Yeah, to Mill, who believed in something like Malthus's doctrine, land seemed comparatively a little thing that could accomplish nothing toward the eradication of pauperism and the abolition of want, ends that could be reached only as men learned to repress a natural instinct. Great as he was and pure as he was, warm heart and noble mind, John Stuart Mill, he yet never saw the true harmony of economic laws, nor realized how from this one great fundamental wrong flow want and misery and vice and shame. Else he could never have written this sentence: the land of Ireland, the land of every country, belongs to the people of that country. The individuals called landowners have no right in morality and justice to anything but the rent or compensation for its saleable value. In the name of the prophet, figs. I guess I'm not sure. Fiddle-dee-dee. If the land of any country belong to the people of that country, what right in morality and justice have the individuals called landowners to the rent? Yeah, it is pretty funny. I started reading this sentence and I'm like, wait, this all seems right here. Like, how does the land belongs to everybody? And then he says, the individuals called landowners, they have no right. And you're like, yeah, they have no right in morality and justice to anything. And then he's like, oh, but the rent or compensation for its saleable value. If the land of any country belongs to the people of that country, what right in morality and justice have the individuals called landowners to the rent? If the land belongs to the people, why in the name of morality and justice should the people pay its saleable value for their own? Preach. Herbert Spencer says, in Social Statics, page 142, it may be well to say in the new reprint of this book, this is a little note from George, in 1897, that this and all other references to Herbert Spencer's Social Statics are from the edition of that book published by Appleton with its consent. Social Statics was repudiated with a new edition under the name of Social Statics abridged and revised in this place. Alright, this is, there's something. Mr. Spencer has said in denial. Okay, we do want to read this actually. At that time, Social Statics was repudiated, and a new edition under the name of Social Statics Abridged and Revised has taken its place. From this, all that the first Social Statics had said in denial of property in land has been eliminated. So everything that it had said in denial of property in land has been, and it of course contains nothing here referred to. Oh, So social stacks got all fixed up after George wrote. Mr. Spencer has also been driven by the persistent heckling of the English single taxmen. So the single taxers got to him. They insisted on asking him the questions suggested in the first Social Statics to bring out a small volume entitled Mr. Herbert Spencer on the Land Question, in which are reprinted in parallel columns Chapter 9 of Social Statics with what he considers valid answers to himself as given in Justice, I guess his other book or something, in 1891. This has also been reprinted by Appleton and Amp Company and constitutes, I think, the very funniest answer to himself ever made by a man who claimed to be a philosopher. All right, well, a little background on what Herbert Spencer said. So he at some point said, perhaps he went back on this, Herbert Spencer said, had we to deal with the parties who originally robbed the human race of its heritage, we might make short work of the matter. Uh-huh. And then George says, why not make short work of the matter anyhow? For this robbery is not like the robbery of a horse or a sum of money that ceases with the act. It is a fresh and continuous robbery that goes on every day and every hour. It is not from the produce of the past the rent is drawn. It is from the produce of the present. It is a toll levied upon labor constantly and continuously. Every blow of the hammer, every stroke of the pick, every thrust of the shuttle, I don't know what that means, every throb of the steam engine pays it tribute. It levies upon the earnings of the men. Yeah, think of Hunger Games. I volunteer's tribute. Is not Hunger Games just... We look at Katniss and her family and the people from, what are they, Sector 13 or whatever. Uh, they're not like chattel slavery, but they're land slaves. There's nowhere else for them to go. Everything they make is given away. It looks almost identical to chattel slavery. Of course, the ones who get thrown into, the ring, the Hunger Games, they basically, that is chattel slavery. So I don't know. You might argue that Hunger Games is just a depiction of chattel slavery. But they're not like chain gangs, and they each person can like set up their own little job that they want to do in their little sector, right? So I guess that's like the slight distinction. Um, and if you believe in something like a free market, like suppose you owned 1,000 slaves, would it be to maximize their use? Would you want to have to tell each one of them every day what to do? Um, I guess if you owned a company that, I guess when you look at these giant companies that have thousands of workers, that's still a somewhat efficient way of organizing them. But say you own 1,000,000 slaves. At some point, it's better to like effectively let them be wage slaves instead of having to tell them when they can eat, sleep, and do everything themselves. Uh, like the best way to manage 1,000,000 slaves would be to let them freely trade with one another and then come in and take everything that they have produced above, a subsistence wage for them. All right, anyway, all this to say is that Hunger Games is a Georgist trilogy. Um, George writes, it levies, and this is the tyranny of land monopoly, it levies upon the earnings of the men who, deep underground, risk their lives, and of those who over white surges hang to reeling masts. I don't know what that means. It claims that the just reward of the capitalist and the fruits of the inventor's patient effort. It claims the just reward of the capitalist and the fruits of the inventor's patient effort. It takes little children from play and from school and compels them to work before their bones are hard or their muscles are firm. Yeah, we've now done this by law as one way of fighting back against the landlords. It robs the shivering of warmth, the hungry of food, the sick of medicine. This we haven't fixed. Hungry of food, we give them terrible, super processed food. Um, give them all the Coca-Cola they want. The which, yeah, it's just crazy how much money companies make off of like school lunches. And it's just the worst kind of food. The anxious, it robs of peace, it debases and embrutes and embitters. Embrutes is a good word. It turns them into brutes. It crowds families of 8 and 10 into a single squalid room. Yep, the foster kid, he's like 21 now. He's who rents a room from my family. He grew up a couple miles away with living in a single room, and I think he has 6 siblings, so there were 8 of them, and I think also maybe his uncles lived with him for a while. Um, it herds like swine agricultural gangs of boys and girls. Okay, I don't think his youngest brother had been born yet, but anyway. It fills the gin palace and groggery with those who have no comfort in their homes. It makes lads who might be useful men candidates for prison and penitentiaries. It fills brothels with girls who might have known the pure joy of motherhood. Yeah, is it not clear that that gangs and prostitutes are just the male and female versions of desperation and yeah. It sends greed and all evil passions prowling through society as a hard winter drives the wolves to the abodes of men. It darkens faith in the human soul and across the reflection of a just and merciful Creator draws the veil of a hard and blind and cruel fate. Yeah, it's Progress and Poverty starts off, you know, let's just let's just pick on these old economists and does that. We did that for weeks, and now it's like it's it's we have to change the rules because the rules are killing a large chunk of society, and it gets heavy. And then it gets helpful when he gives us actually the remedy, the land value tax, but we're not quite there yet. See you next time. Book 3, Chapter 7. Book 7, Chapter 3 continued. Not much left. I guess I could have finished it, but I did not. I don't feel like pricing. Maybe we can justify it as like, I don't know. Um, should we pay off landlords? Um, the compensation claim of landowners to compensation. Claim of landowners to compensation. Um, George says paying off landlords isn't just buying out the landlords isn't just. Now, no, no, 172. New episode. Well, I guess we'll upload the YouTube one first. Yeah, okay. Thumbnail. It is made for kids. It's made for everybody. Maybe news and politics is better than nonprofits and activism. I don't know. It's politics. Old news. Alright. And now the next one. 73. John Stuart Mill. Nice guy. Wrong about compensating landlords. George says Malthusian doctrine deludes people to the significance of private property and land. The true owners of Ireland, the Irish people, don't owe the landlords nothing. Now, no, no. 74, getting ahead of myself. Next, publish. HDD. 73. 76 trombones in the big parade. 110 cornets close behind. Followed by rows and rows of the finest virtuosos. The mm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. In Cerritos, news and politics, we're sticking with it. I think I have a knack for being like anti-meme or something. Content, comments, here we go. Is this the whole? Mortgages are like rent freezes. You buy with a down payment. If you ever pay it off, you get to own it. Otherwise, you keep refinancing. I think Gabu said the UK GB freeze. UK reparations. The government paid £20 million compensation to the owners of the Free Sale Act. Nothing was paid to the slaves themselves. Oh, that's good. Hmm. I don't know what's. Um. How many people died in Civil War? And that's deaths. How many casualties in the Civil War? Okay, they're just giving deaths. 1.5 million casualties. Loss through death, wounds, injury, sickness, internment, capture, through being missing, a casualty, and fatality. Death is only one of the ways we can become. Yeah. I wonder if double is the normal amount. Oh, I'm just going to say what I'm going to say. They might not tell you to have sex with them directly, but they may use economic rents you pay to get their own prostitutes to pay their, and out of desperation pay their rents. You have to make money as a prostitute, which yes. Very good point. Yeah, yeah. Dissociation. Oh, blame Mr. McDonald for not paying his burger flippers more because he's paying market price or keeping them in good health or making sure they're safe at night. I'd say that, I'd say something like the abolishment of slavery also precipitated the government becoming more of a nanny social welfare state, welfare state. Like, if the government were as hands off now as it was at the time of the Civil War, I wouldn't be surprised if the lowest class was actually better off having a master that was incentivized to keep them healthy and hardworking. But given that we've made laws against child labor, um, you know, rape, and I guess we've always had um, against, you know, actually enforcing it against, well, made laws against child labor, sexual harassment, provided some free health care and food that it's probably it's better. What else? Maybe. I don't like, now that I'm typing, yeah, it's quite strong. The freed might not have been better off. But this is such an this I don't know and am skeptical on how this of the well. All right. Equivalent to about 17 billion, 16.5 billion in today's terms. Approximately half went to absentee landlords in the UK, while the rest went to slave owners in Africa and the West Indies. The largest total amount paid in compensation was to Sir Gladstone, 1st Baronet, father of Prime Minister William Gladstone, who was paid £106,000, enough to purchase goods that would cost about 10 million in 2021, or labor worth about 95 million. What? How could it? He could buy goods that would oh, I guess goods then. That's weird. I don't. If that much money could buy all these goods that would cost 10 million today, I guess they're just saying, and labor at that time would be, a better deal today. Yeah, in compensation for losing his 2,508 slaves used across 9 plantations. Where were these plantations, though? Payments of the bonds to descendants of creditors only finalized in 2015 when the British government decided to modernize the gilt portfolio by redeeming all remaining undated gilts long after this money being borrowed in the final repayment of a portion that may have someone else was due to the type of financial instrument that was used rather than the amount of money borrowed. Well, that's wild. Scottish merchant and Tory politician. He acquired ownership over several slave plantations in the British colonies of Jamaica and Demerara, Essequibo. He had a slave rebellion on one of his plantations. Excuse me, I hope that wasn't too loud. But I'm not even recording, and I don't think anyone's watching, so. Unless there are people watching the VOD. Yeah, I guess what made British slavery so weird, like they kept all their slaves in these other lands. It'd be like instead of us bringing African slaves to America, if we had just set up uh, if we had just set up slave plantations in Africa, and then you wonder, you know, yeah, then it's very hard to imagine. Say all the people in the South owned a bunch of plantations over in Africa. It's hard to imagine fighting a war against them to give up those slaves. And you wonder if these payments to these slave owners in the UK heavily like retarded the UK's development, and it's like sort of what might have enabled the US to progress past them, or maybe even what enabled Germany to grow? I don't know. How did France get rid of slavery? I guess they didn't have as many colonies, but it did have some. They were trafficking 13,000 African people as slaves to the French West Indies. What? What? Where is this? Oh, this is, wow, that's Panama. I so cannot get over how east-west Panama is, and like all that is so, I just think of it as so north-south. But this is what we were looking at. These are the West Indies. It's so funny, like in a board game, like you would never pay attention, like you only think of like the significance of big masses of land, and you're like, why even bother claiming all these little islands? But islands are pretty sweet with that easy access to water, to transporting goods. Like imagine if this were just land, it's way easier to transport a lot of heavy goods across water than it is across land. Interesting to think about the geography. And you see like all this greenery here. And you wonder about Mexico. Like this is all desert, but like there's, I guess we have all this. I didn't realize Wyoming is so desert. Not much green there. And Denver has a lot. Utah. What is all this? What's bringing this green? Nevada. Not much happening in Nevada. That is desert land. I'm actually surprised there's so much green. I guess this, I don't know what the color, like this becomes not green because of all, like what would have been here. Would this have been green if there weren't a Los Angeles? Or, I don't know. Green is good. Then you come up here, there's tons of green. But I guess this is all just way too cold. I feel like it shouldn't be colored the same. Like this, they were like, yeah, they're like, no, this won't work. And this gets to be white. What even do all these layers mean? Um, why isn't northern Canada more heavily populated? It's not arable. Why is it not arable, though? What makes land, what causes land to be arable? It's just not good land, huh? It just doesn't get enough. It doesn't. Hmm. I mean, I could have answered on a test that it wasn't any good for farming, but I couldn't tell you why. Weather pattern, geography, climate. I mean, I would have said, oh, it's really cold up there. I don't know. And the sunlight is too dramatic. Doesn't get enough, and then it gets too much. I don't know. All right, goodbye.